The silence of space shattered as the first Void swarm ships tore through the defensive line at Proxima Station. Admiral Park stood on the command deck of the Confederation flagship Eternal Dawn, his weathered face illuminated by emergency lights as tactical displays flashed red across the bridge. "They're not slowing down," Lieutenant Dae-Sung reported, voice steady despite the chaos. 3 more Confederation cruisers lost in Sector 7. The Admiral's fingers tightened around the railing. This wasn't a battle, it was a slaughter. The Void Swarm had appeared without warning 3 weeks ago, their ships like liquid shadows that absorbed light rather than reflected it. They moved with impossible precision, as if guided by a single mind. "Redirect the 7th Fleet to cover the evacuation routes," Park ordered. "Priority to civilian transports." On the main viewer, the station's outer ring crumpled under concentrated fire from the swarm. Its once proud spiral arms, home to 7 different species and a major trade hub, twisted into molten scrap. The station's shield generators flared brilliantly before going dark forever. Across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy, 17 advanced civilizations had built the Confederation over millennia. Species that once warred now shared technology, culture, and protection. Their combined fleets numbered in the thousands, sleek, crystalline Talon cruisers, the biomechanical hives of the Nor Collective, the gravity-defying rings of Pollux warships. None of it mattered against the swarm. "Sir, we're receiving distress calls from Helix Colony and New Andromeda simultaneously," Communications Officer Jin Ho said, his 4-fingered hands moving rapidly over holographic controls. "The swarm is attacking multiple systems at once." Outside, the viewport space itself seemed to darken as another wave of swarm vessels materialized. They didn't use conventional propulsion, they simply appeared, as if folded into reality from somewhere else. The Confederation's most advanced weaponry barely scratched their hulls. Quantum torpedoes designed to split matter at the subatomic level dissipated harmlessly against their defenses. Plasma lances that could cut through moon-sized asteroids merely caused the swarm ships to shimmer briefly before continuing their advance. "They're jamming our coordination networks," reported Tactical Officer Sunmi, sweat beading on her forehead despite the bridge's cooling systems. "Fleet captains can't synchronize attacks." Park had seen many battles in his 60 years of service, but nothing like this. The swarm wasn't just winning, they were dismantling the very foundation of Confederation military doctrine. Communicate, coordinate, concentrate, fire. On a nearby world called Elysium, once famous for its floating crystal cities and atmospheric gardens, billions watched in horror as dark ships descended through the clouds. The planetary defense grid, considered impenetrable for 3 centuries, failed within minutes. "The Arborians are requesting immediate reinforcement at Elysium," Jin Ho called out. "Their orbital platforms are failing." "We have nothing to send," Park replied grimly. "Tell them to evacuate while they still can." The swarm's weapons defied conventional physics. They fired beams that seemed to unravel matter itself, converting solid objects into swirling particles that dispersed into nothingness. When they targeted a planet's surface, entire cities simply disappeared, leaving perfectly circular craters of smooth glass. Within days, the outer colonies fell silent. Refugee ships clogged hyperspace lanes, some making it to temporary safety, others intercepted by swarm patrols that appeared as if from nowhere. The scientific minds of the Confederation worked desperately to understand their enemy. The insectoid Krell mathematicians calculated attack patterns, but found no logic they could counter. The psychic Marians attempted to sense the swarm's consciousness, but encountered only a vast, cold emptiness that drove several of their strongest minds to madness. By the 2nd week, half the major worlds had fallen. The vast shipyards of Talos IV, birthplace of the Confederation's most powerful dreadnoughts, burned so brightly the fires could be seen from neighboring systems. The data libraries of Vega Prime, containing the collective knowledge of billions, went dark without warning. On board the Eternal Dawn, Admiral Park received increasingly desperate reports. "The diplomatic corps has attempted communication on all known frequencies," Jin Ho said. "No response from the swarm." "What about the experimental phase shift technology from R&D?" Park asked. Sunmi shook her head. "Tested against a scout ship," near Deneb, failed completely. The ship was destroyed with all hands. As the third week began, the Confederation's High Council gathered at Axiom, their ancient capital world hidden deep within an unstable nebula that had protected it for generations. They brought together their greatest minds, their most powerful weapons, their most sacred artifacts. If they couldn't defeat the swarm, perhaps they could preserve something of their civilizations. But even Axiom's location proved insufficient. Protection. Somehow the swarm found them. They're inside the nebula, Daesung reported, voice finally breaking. Thousands of ships approaching Axiom from all vectors. Admiral Park closed his eyes briefly. The Eternal Dawn was one of the last functional capital ships in the Confederation fleet. Their orders were clear. Protect the evacuation of the High Council members who might carry on their species' legacies. All power to forward shields, he commanded. Plot an intercept course. The massive flagship turned toward the oncoming darkness, its engines flaring bright against the nebula's swirling gases. Behind them, dozens of small craft carried precious cargo, genetic samples, cultural databases, and the last representatives of once mighty civilizations. As the swarm closed in, Park thought of the old stories. Long ago, before the Confederation existed, there had been another species that showed great promise. Resourceful, adaptable, surprisingly tenacious despite their fragile forms. They had called themselves humans, and then mysteriously they had withdrawn from galactic affairs. Perhaps they had been wiser than the rest. Perhaps they had seen this coming. The Eternal Dawn shuddered as the first swarm weapon struck its shields. On the tactical display, thousands of enemy ships converged on their position. The galaxy that had shimmered with the light of countless civilizations now burned, system by system, world by world. And in the darkness between the stars, something watched and waited. The science vessel Stellar Nomad drifted silently through the debris field that had once been the Talon defense station. Its outer hull, once gleaming with the ceremonial blue markings of the Confederation Science Division, now bore scorch marks and hasty patch repairs. Inside, the life support systems hummed at minimum capacity, preserving oxygen for the 37 souls who represented the last known members of the High Council. Power reserves at 17%, announced Navigator Minho, his scaled fingers adjusting controls on a console that sparked intermittently. We should power down non-essential systems if we want to maintain cloak integrity for another cycle. Councillor Yuna nodded, her normally immaculate formal robes now stained and torn after 3 months of constant flight. Once the representative of the Arborian coalition that governed 17 garden worlds, she now presided over nothing but memories. The swarm had been methodical in its destruction. Do what's necessary, she said. We can't risk detection. The Stellar Nomad had survived by remaining invisible, hiding in nebulae, powered down inside asteroid fields, or drifting in the shadow of gas giants. Its experimental cloaking technology, still in prototype phase when the swarm arrived, had been their only advantage. That and the fact that the swarm seemed to prioritize populated worlds and military targets over a single, seemingly insignificant research vessel. In the ship's cramped common area, converted to an impromptu council chamber, representatives of once mighty civilizations huddled around heating units. The serpentine Noor ambassador, Sao Yu, coiled tightly to conserve body heat. Beside him, the crystalline form of Quan Jin, last of the Luminar philosophers, refracted the dim emergency, lighting into small rainbows on the walls. We've lost contact with the resistance pocket in the Vega system, reported communications specialist Gihun, his antennae drooping with exhaustion. That's the third group this week. The survivors fell silent. In the months since the fall of Axiom, they had discovered other pockets of resistance, small groups hiding on remote worlds or abandoned mining facilities. One by one, these final flickering lights of civilization were being extinguished. Perhaps it is time we considered the unthinkable, rumbled Councillor Hanjay, the massive Ursidian's thick fur unable to hide his emaciated frame. The Preservation Protocol, several councillors gasped. The Preservation Protocol was the final contingency. Developed in the war's early days when defeat still seemed impossible, it would scatter the survivors to the most remote, primitive worlds at the galaxy's edge, where they would live in hiding, abandoning technology that might attract the swarm's attention. It meant the effective end of their civilizations, preserving only genetic continuity. Before the argument could intensify, an alarm sounded from the bridge. "Counselors," Minho's voice crackled over the intercom. "We've detected something unusual." They crowded onto the bridge, where the main sensor display showed a pulsing dot at the edge of their scanning range. "It appears to be a transmission," Gihan said, adjusting his equipment. "But on frequencies we haven't used in centuries. I'm surprised our systems even detected it." "The swarm?" Yuna asked, tension evident in her voice. "No," Gihan replied. "The signature is completely different. This is old technology. Incredibly old." "Can you decode it?" asked Quanjin, her crystalline body chiming softly as she moved closer to the display. "Trying now. It's using encryption protocols from the early Confederation era." The bridge fell. Silent as Gihan worked, his fingers moving rapidly over the holographic interface. After several minutes, he straightened suddenly, his antennae rigid with surprise. "It's coordinates," he said, "and a timestamp. 3 days from now." "A trap," Hanjay growled. "The swarm has learned to bait us." "I don't think so," Gihan replied. "The signal is being transmitted by an automated beacon. Based on the decay rate of the transmission, it's been broadcasting for at least 70 years. 70 years. Yuna moved closer to examine the data. "That predates the swarm's arrival by decades." "There's more," Gihan added, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The beacon signature identifies its creators as human." The word hung in the recycled air like a ghost. Humans. A species mentioned only in the oldest Confederation records, a promising civilization that had developed faster than light travel independently and briefly joined the galactic community, before mysteriously disappearing from known space centuries ago. "Access the emergency archives," Yuna ordered. "Find everything we have on humans." The ship's AI, operating at reduced capacity to save power, projected a series of images and text files. Most were corrupted or incomplete, casualties of the hasty evacuation from Axiom. What remained showed bipedal beings, remarkably similar to several Confederation species, but distinctive in their adaptability. "According to these fragments," Gihan reported, "the humans withdrew from Confederation space approximately 300 years ago. There was speculation about internal conflict or resource depletion, but no confirmation. And now, as the galaxy burns, they send a signal." Hanjai's skepticism was evident. "The timing is curious," Quanjin chimed. "Perhaps they knew something we didn't." Yuna studied the coordinates. They pointed to a binary star system in a sparsely populated region of space, unremarkable except for its relative proximity to what had once been human territory. "Navigator, how long would it take us to reach these coordinates at maximum stealth?" "Speed?" she asked. "Just under 3 days," Minho replied. "But Counselor, our fuel reserves—" "Plot the course," she interrupted. "Counselors, I know what you're thinking. This could be nothing. A forgotten beacon, a cosmic coincidence, or, worse, a trap. But we have exhausted all other options. Our supplies are dwindling. The swarm grows more efficient at finding our kind every day." She looked around at the haunted faces of her companions, once diplomats, scientists, and leaders who commanded respect across thousands of worlds. Now refugees in a conquered galaxy. "What do we have to lose?" she asked simply. No one argued. The stellar nomad adjusted course, its engines barely whispering as it accelerated toward the mysterious coordinates. Twice during their journey, they detected swarm patrols and powered down completely, drifting silently as the enemy passed within kilometers of their position. On the 3rd day, they arrived at the designated location, an empty region of space between the twin stars, with no planets, no stations, no signs of habitation. "Scan complete," Minho announced. "Nothing here but cosmic dust and radiation from the binary stars." "The timestamp," Gihan reminded them. "We still have 4 hours." They waited in tense silence as the minutes crawled by. Fuel cells dipped to dangerous levels. Life support began cycling air that tasted increasingly stale. 2 minutes to the timestamp," Gi-hun announced finally. Yuna found herself holding her breath. Around her, the last representatives of a fallen civilization watched the empty space before them with desperate hope. 1 minute passed, then another. Perhaps the calculations were wrong, Hanjai began. Then space itself seemed to fold inward, reality distorting like fabric being pinched from another dimension. A point of absolute darkness appeared, expanding outward into a circular void that defied the laws of physics as they understood them. From this impossible rift emerged the bow of a ship unlike anything in Confederation records. Angular, massive, and bearing markings in an unfamiliar script. As it fully materialized, the rift closed behind it, leaving no trace of its impossible passage. Gi-hun's console chimed with an incoming transmission. "They're hailing us," he whispered, awe evident in his voice. On the main view screen appeared a bipedal figure in a dark uniform, a human unmistakably similar to the ancient records. "Confederation vessel," the human said in perfect galactic standard. "This is Captain Junho of the United Earthship Redemption. We've been expecting you." Silence gripped the bridge of the stellar nomad as Captain Junho's image dominated their view screen. The human stood tall with close-cropped black hair and eyes that seemed to hold both warmth and calculation. His uniform was unlike anything in Confederation records, a deep blue material that seemed to absorb and redirect, light in subtle ways. How did you know we would be here?" Counselor Yuna finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. A slight smile crossed Junho's face. "That's a long conversation. Your ship appears damaged, and your power signatures suggest critical resource depletion. If you're willing, we offer safe harbor. We have compatible docking facilities." Hanjay pushed forward, his massive Ursidian frame filling the pickup area. "This could be a trap. The swarm has proven capable of deception before." "The swarm doesn't negotiate or communicate," Junho replied calmly, "and they certainly don't build ships like ours." He gestured to someone off-screen. "I'm sending visual feeds of our vessel. Perhaps that will help with your decision." The screen split to show external views of the human warship. The Redemption dwarfed their science vessel, its hull a complex geometry of angles and planes that seemed to change slightly when viewed from different perspectives. Strange energy fields rippled across its surface in patterns that defied conventional shield harmonics. "Those aren't standard propulsion systems," Navigator Minho observed, studying the readouts. "And our sensors can't penetrate their hull material." Yuna exchanged glances with the other council members. They had fled for months, watching their civilization burn. What choice did they really have? "We accept your offer," she said finally. The Redemption extended a docking arm unlike any they had seen, a tunnel of shifting material that seemed to accommodate itself to the Nomad's damaged hull rather than requiring precise alignment. As they passed through the connection point, the survivors felt a strange sensation, as if briefly existing in multiple places at once. The docking bay that received them was cavernous, easily large enough to hold dozens of vessels the size of the Nomad. The architecture was both elegant and unsettling, clean lines and flowing curves that occasionally seemed to bend in directions that shouldn't be possible. Human crew members in various uniforms moved with purpose, some wearing exoskeleton-like devices that enhanced their movements. "Welcome to the UES Redemption," said a voice behind them. They turned to find Captain Junho standing there, accompanied by 2 officers. In person, there was something subtly different about the humans, a quality to their movements, a clarity to their eyes, that suggested enhancement beyond natural evolution. "I am Captain Junho," he said, bowing slightly. "This is my first officer, Commander Doyon, and Chief Science Officer Tae-woo." Yuna stepped forward, attempting to maintain the dignity of her position despite her tattered appearance. "I am High Counselor Yuna of the Arborian Coalition. We represent what remains of the Galactic Confederation." The human captain nodded solemnly. "We know. We've been monitoring the swarm's advance since they first appeared in this galaxy." "Monitoring?" Hanjai growled. "You watched as 17 civilizations burned? As trillions died?" "We had no choice," Commander Doyon said, her voice carrying a quiet intensity. "Direct intervention too early would have been catastrophic. not just for us, but for any hope of eventual victory. Before the argument could escalate, the deck beneath them shuddered slightly. Alarm flashed across Junho's face. "Proximity alert," announced a voice over the ship's communication system. "Swarm scout vessels detected in adjacent sector bearing 227 Mark 43. "They must have followed us," Gi-hun said, his antennae flattening in fear. Junho touched a communication device on his wrist. "Bridge, initiate phase shift, Protocol 3. Counselors, please follow me quickly." He led them through corridors that curved in unexpected ways, occasionally passing sections where the walls seemed partially transparent, revealing layers of technology integrated with materials that resembled living tissue. They arrived at what appeared to be a secondary command center, smaller than a traditional bridge, but filled with advanced holographic displays and control interfaces unlike anything the Confederation had developed. 3 swarm scout ships, reported an officer at one of the stations. "Standard search pattern. They'll detect our position in approximately 40 seconds. "Execute phase shift," Junho ordered calmly. The view screen showed the empty space around them, where the 3 swarm vessels, black asymmetrical forms that seemed to devour light, moved in their methodical search pattern. Then something extraordinary happened. The view began to shift, colors bleeding into strange spectrums as reality itself seemed to warp around the redemption. The Confederation survivors felt a momentary sensation of vertigo, as if they existed in multiple places simultaneously. When it passed, the view screen showed the same region of space, but the swarm ships now moved right through their position without any sign of detection. What just happened?" Quan Jin asked, her crystalline form vibrating with confusion. "We shifted partially out of this dimensional plane," explained Science Officer Tae Woo. "We exist simultaneously in adjacent reality states. The swarm can only perceive and interact with standard space-time." Han Jai's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Such technology is theoretical at best. Even our most advanced physicists could only postulate its possibility." "For the Confederation, yes," Junho acknowledged. "Humanity chose a different path." He gestured toward a central holographic display that activated at his movement. It showed a timeline spanning centuries, with branching probability tracks and decision points. 300 years ago, our predictive mathematics, what you might call temporal forecasting, indicated the eventual arrival of the swarm. We could see the probability converging toward certainty, but we knew conventional resistance would fail. "So you abandoned the galaxy?" Yuna asked, unable to keep accusation from her voice. "No," Doyon interjected. "We withdrew to prepare. We established settlements in pocket dimensions, spaces adjacent to normal reality but inaccessible, through conventional means. There, time flows differently. We've had centuries to develop the technologies needed to fight an enemy that conventional physics cannot defeat." The display shifted to show the redemption's schematics, layers of systems that operated on principles the Confederation scientists couldn't begin to comprehend. The outer hull incorporated materials that existed partially in other dimensions. The weapons systems manipulated fundamental forces in ways that seemed impossible. "This ship," Tae Woo explained, "can phase between realities, becoming effectively invisible and invulnerable to swarm weapons. Our offensive systems target the swarm's unique vulnerabilities, specifically the quantum entanglement network that allows their hive mind to function." "And you're just one ship," Counselor Yuna said, beginning to understand. Captain Junho's expression grew determined. "The first of many. The redemption is our advanced scout, confirming our models and testing our systems against the actual enemy. The rest of humanity's fleet stands ready." "How many vessels?" Hanjai asked. "Thousands," Junho replied simply, "built across hundreds of years of preparation in spaces where time moves differently than here." The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. After months of hopeless flight, after watching their civilizations crumble before an unstoppable enemy, the survivors faced something they had almost forgotten: possibility. "The swarm scout ships are moving away," reported the sensor officer. "No indication they detected us." Junho turned to the Confederation representatives, his eyes reflecting determination and perhaps a hint of regret for what they had endured. "We couldn't save everyone," he said quietly. "We knew that from the beginning, but now we can begin the real fight. Humanity has returned to the galaxy, and we bring with us the one thing the swarm cannot comprehend." "What's that?" asked Una. "Hope," he replied, as the stars on the view screen shifted back to their normal spectrum. "Now let's show you what this warship can really do." The observation deck of the Redemption offered a panoramic view of the battle unfolding before them. Counselor Una stood transfixed as the human warship engaged 3 swarm destroyers that had been harvesting resources from an abandoned Confederation mining outpost. Unlike the desperate, chaotic conflicts she had witnessed during the fall, this engagement had an almost choreographed quality. "Dimensional shift complete," announced the calm voice of the ship's combat AI. "All systems nominal, targets acquired." Captain Jun-Ho stood at the tactical station, his posture relaxed despite the deadly dance playing out before them. "Execute attack pattern Theta 9. Focus on the lead vessel's stern quadrant." The Redemption moved with impossible grace for Sei, a ship of its size, sliding between normal space and something else, a blurring effect that made it appear in multiple positions simultaneously. Weapons fired from turrets that seemed to materialize from the hull itself, releasing streams of energy that Una's scientific mind couldn't begin to classify. "What are we seeing?" she asked Science Officer Taewoo, who monitored the battle from a holographic interface beside her. "Quantum disruption beams," he explained. "They don't attack the swarm ships directly. Instead, they sever the connections between their hive mind components." On the view screen, the lead swarm vessel shuddered as the beam struck it. Unlike conventional weapons that would have exploded against shields or carved into hull plating, these seemed to pass through the outer structure. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ship's movements became erratic, its previously precise maneuvers degrading into confused, almost organic twitches. "You're not destroying them," observed Hanjai, his bear-like features creased in concentration. "You're disconnecting them." "Exactly," Commander Do-Yeon confirmed from her position at the command hub. "The swarm functions as a networked intelligence. Each ship contains components that communicate instantaneously across vast distances through quantum entanglement. Break those connections, and they become just machines," finished Kwanjin, her crystalline form reflecting the battle's lights in prismatic patterns. The disabled swarm ship drifted aimlessly, its weapon systems firing randomly into space. Its 2 companions immediately altered course, moving to engulf the stricken vessel. "They're trying to reintegrate it," Jun-Ho observed, targeting solution on secondary vessels, the Redemption's weapons reconfigured, emitting a different frequency of energy that caused the approaching swarm ships to phase partially out of normal space. But unlike the human vessel's controlled dimensional shifts, this appeared chaotic and unstable. "Phase disruptors at full capacity," reported a weapons officer. "Target vessels experiencing temporal fragmentation." Una watched in amazement as sections of the swarm ships seemed to exist in different moments simultaneously, parts of them moving faster than others, energy systems cycling at conflicting rates until the strain tore them apart from within. "How is this possible?" she whispered. "We don't just fight in 3-dimensional space," Taewoo explained. "We fight across multiple states of reality. The swarm exists fully in conventional spacetime. We don't." Within minutes, the engagement was over, where 3 swarm destroyers had been harvesting raw materials, now drifted only debris and disabled components. Special teams in exosuits that shifted between dimensional states were dispatched to collect samples for further study. "Prepare jump coordinates for the Helios system," Jun-Ho ordered. "Intelligence suggests swarm presence at the former refugee outpost." This had been their pattern for 2 weeks since the Confederation survivors had come aboard the Redemption. The human warship would locate swarm outposts, engage with overwhelming technological advantage, then move on before reinforcements could arrive. Each victory revealed more about swarm capabilities. Each engagement refined the humans' already formidable combat systems. Most importantly, they established safe zones, regions of space where the Redemption's dimensional technology created pockets that existed slightly out of phase with normal reality, hidden from swarm detection. In these zones, scattered Confederation survivors began to gather, Ground operations presented different challenges. Commander HFY led the Special Forces team through the ruins of what had once been New Terran Colony, her phase suit allowing her to shift partially between dimensions as needed. The abandoned settlement had become a swarm processing center, where harvested materials from nearby worlds were being converted into new vessels. 5 targets detected in the central structure, reported Sergeant Kyung-min through their neural link. Unlike conventional communication systems that the swarm could intercept, the team's thoughts flowed directly through quantum-entangled particles embedded in their enhanced nervous systems. HFY signaled the team forward with a hand gesture. The 6 soldiers moved with preternatural coordination, their movements enhanced by exoskeletons that anticipated their intentions microseconds before their muscles responded. The swarm ground units resembled their ships, dark, angular constructs that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They moved on multiple appendages with unsettling precision, harvesting technology and resources from the colony with mechanical efficiency. "Remember, we need one intact for analysis," HFY reminded her team. Disruptors on setting 3. They struck without warning. The phase suits allowed them to materialize seemingly from thin air, weapons already firing precisely calibrated beams that severed the swarm unit's connection to their collective consciousness. The first 4 collapsed immediately, their limbs twitching with uncoordinated impulses. The 5th, however, adapted with frightening speed. It reconfigured its outer shell, developing a field that partially blocked the disruptor's effects. It lunged toward Kyung-min with appendages that morphed into blade-like protrusions. HFY reacted instantly, shifting her phase state to pass directly through a concrete wall. She rematerialized behind the swarm unit and plunged a specialized device into its central processing node. The unit froze, caught between dimensional states. "Containment successful," she reported. "Prep for extraction." Within hours, the former colony had been transformed. Dimensional generators established a safe zone that existed partially outside normal space-time. The first refugees, miners who had hidden in deep tunnels since the initial invasion, emerged cautiously into the protected settlement. Back aboard the Redemption, Captain Junho presented their progress to the Confederation Council members on a strategic display that showed the galaxy in 3-dimensional detail with colored indicators, representing known swarm concentrations and newly established safe zones. "We've secured 7 outposts and confirmed contact with survivor groups in 12 systems," he explained. "The swarm is beginning to adjust tactics, but they can't counter technology they fundamentally don't understand." "And these safe zones," Councillor Yuna asked, "they'll remain hidden as long as the dimensional generators remain powered," confirmed Chief Engineer Su Jin, a woman whose eyes gleamed with subtle cybernetic enhancements. "Each generator creates a field that exists partially in our pocket dimension. To the swarm, these locations simply don't exist." Hanjai studied the tactical display with newfound hope. "How long before your main fleet arrives?" "They've already begun transition," Junho replied. "The first battle group will emerge within days, the full armada within weeks." On a secondary screen, they watched as a captured swarm unit was carefully analyzed in a containment field. Science Officer Taewoo directed the examination, his movements deliberate as he interfaced directly with advanced diagnostic systems through neural implants. "We're learning more about their communication methods," he reported. "Their quantum entanglement network has signatures we hadn't anticipated. The next generation of disruptors will be even more effective." Yuna watched as humans and the remnants of 17 civilizations worked side by side. Engineers from the crystalline luminar race helped calibrate dimensional sensors, nor mathematicians with their multi-threaded consciousness assisted in calculating phase shift equations. Even the massive Ursidians, with their phenomenal strength, aided in reconfiguring physical systems. "You knew this would happen," she said, quietly to Junho. "You knew exactly when to return." The captain's expression grew somber. "Our probability matrices weren't perfect. We expected to save more. Every life lost before our return weighs heavily. But now you're here," Quan Jin chimed, her crystalline voice resonating with new strength. "And the swarm faces something they never anticipated." "Yes," Junho agreed, his eyes fixed on the tactical display as another indicator shifted from red to green. For the first time since they entered this galaxy, the swarm is experiencing something new. "What's that?" asked Hanjai. A small smile crossed the captain's face. "Doubt? The sky above New Axiom, once the proud capital of the Galactic Confederation, now a burned husk, rippled like disturbed water. The dimensional rifts appeared simultaneously across 7 sectors of space, each tearing open reality in carefully calculated patterns. From these impossible wounds in space-time emerged the ships of humanity's armada. Unlike the lone redemption that had heralded their arrival, these vessels came in breathtaking variety. Massive dreadnoughts with geometric structures that seemed to fold into themselves. Sleek destroyers that phased partially in and out of visibility. Carrier ships housing swarms of fighter craft that moved with hive-mind coordination yet independent intelligence. Each bore the distinct angular aesthetics of human design, yet incorporated technologies developed across 3 centuries of preparation in pocket dimensions where time flowed differently. Admiral Hyun-Soo stood on the command deck of the flagship, Defiance, watching as his fleet took formation around the ruined world. His weathered face reflected both determination and sadness at what had become of this once magnificent planet. "All vessels report successful transition," announced his executive. "Officer Commander Sung-min, phase alignment at 97% efficiency. Better than simulations predicted." "The swarm?" Hyun-Soo asked simply. "Responding exactly as anticipated. We're detecting massive fleet movements across 3 spiral arms. They recognize the threat." On the tactical display, red indicators showing. Swarm vessels converged toward their position from all directions. For months, the Redemption had waged its strategic campaign, testing weapons, establishing safe zones, gathering intelligence. Now the swarm recognized a threat they couldn't ignore, just as planned. "They're abandoning forward positions to concentrate their forces," Sung-min observed, "leaving harvested worlds undefended." "Good." The Admiral's expression remained impassive. "Signal the secondary fleet elements. Operation Reclamation begins now." Across the galaxy, additional rifts opened near worlds the swarm had stripped of resources and abandoned. Smaller human battle groups emerged, immediately deploying dimensional generators that would shield these planets from detection. Confederation survivors who had hidden underground or in remote outposts emerged to find hope where only desolation had existed before. At New Axiom, Captain Jun-ho brought the Redemption alongside the Defiance. His ship, once seemingly overwhelming in its capabilities, now appeared almost modest among the gathered fleet. "Admiral," he said, saluting as he materialized on the Defiance's bridge through dimensional transport technology. "The Confederation Council representatives are ready to observe." Hyun-Soo nodded. "Bring them. They should witness this." Minutes later, Councillor Yuna and the other survivors stood on the Defiance's observation deck. Through its vast, transparent viewport, created from materials that existed partially in alternate dimensional states, they watched as the human fleet arranged itself in a formation unlike any conventional battle strategy. "This isn't just about defeating the swarm, Admiral C," Hyun-Soo explained to them. "It's about severing their network permanently." On the tactical display surrounding them, the swarm forces appeared as a vast dark cloud approaching from multiple vectors. Their numbers seemed overwhelming, tens of thousands of vessels converging on the human fleet. "There are so many," Hanjai rumbled, his Ursidian features tense with concern despite months of witnessing human technological superiority. "Numbers mean nothing when fighting across dimensional boundaries," Commander Sung-min replied confidently. "Prepare primary systems for full network disruption." The human fleet began to move in complex patterns, ships shifting between dimensional states in sequences that seemed chaotic but followed precise mathematical models. As the first wave of swarm vessels approached, the humans didn't fire conventional weapons. Instead, their ships projected overlapping fields of energy that rippled through space-time itself. "What are we seeing?" asked Quan Jin, her crystalline form vibrating slightly in response to the dimensional fluctuations. "The culmination of centuries of preparation," Jun-Ho explained. The swarm functions as a unified consciousness distributed across all its vessels. They communicate instantaneously through quantum entanglement, regardless of distance. And you're attacking that connection, Yuna realized. More than attacking, Admiral Hyun-soo said. We're rewriting it. The leading edge of the swarm formation suddenly faltered. Ships that had moved with perfect coordination began drifting aimlessly or colliding with each other. Some fired weapons in random directions. Others simply went dark, their systems failing as their connection to the collective mind was severed. First phase successful, reported the tactical officer, quantum disruption spreading through their network at projected rates. On the main display, the effect propagated through the swarm fleet like a wave, leaving confusion in its wake. For the first time, the survivors of the Confederation witnessed something they had thought impossible, the swarm in disarray. Second wave approaching, Sungmin announced. These units appear to be adapting, attempting to establish isolated subnet connections. As expected, the Admiral replied calmly, deploy Phase 2 countermeasures. The human fleet's formation shifted, vessels moving with precise coordination into new positions. A different pattern of dimensional energy rippled outward, targeting the swarm's adaptation attempts. They learn quickly, Junho observed. But their adaptations follow predictable patterns we've modeled extensively. The battle, if such a one-sided engagement could be called that, continued for hours. Wave after wave of swarm vessels approached, each attempting new configurations and communication methods. Each was met with precisely calibrated countermeasures that seemed to anticipate their every move. By the time the conflict entered its final phase, the space around New Axiom was filled with drifting, inert swarm vessels, not destroyed but disconnected from their collective intelligence and rendered harmless. Final phase initiating, announced Admiral Hyun-soo. All ships, synchronized dimensional generators. The entire human fleet began to pulse with energy that warped the very fabric of reality around them. The remaining active swarm vessels, now operating with only local coordination, converged in a desperate final assault. What's happening? Hanjae asked, watching as space itself seemed to fold around the approaching swarm ships. We're creating a recursive dimensional pocket, explained Science Officer Taewoo, who had joined them on the observation deck. A space that exists adjacent to normal reality, but can never interact with it again. The effect spread outward from the human fleet, engulfing the approaching swarm vessels. One by one, they simply vanished, not destroyed, but transferred to a pocket dimension from which they could never return. The ultimate containment, Yuna whispered in understanding. When it was over, the space around New Axiom was clear of enemy forces. Throughout the galaxy, the effect rippled through the quantum entanglement network that connected all swarm units. Ships that had terrorized countless worlds for months suddenly lost purpose, their controlling intelligence trapped in a dimension apart from normal space. 3 weeks later, Captain Jun-ho stood with the Confederation Council in what had once been the Grand Assembly Hall of New Axiom. The building remained damaged, its once magnificent dome now open to the sky, but work had begun to restore it. Around them, representatives of humanity worked alongside survivors from 17 civilizations. The remaining swarm vessels have been neutralized or contained, Junho reported. Our dimensional generators have been deployed on 87 worlds, creating safe zones for rebuilding. And the ones trapped in your pocket dimension? Asked Counselor Yuna. They'll remain there, studied from a distance. Perhaps one day we'll understand their true nature and purpose. Until then, they can harm no one. A new member had joined the council table, Admiral Hyun-soo, representing humanity in the reformed galactic government. We have much to rebuild, the Admiral acknowledged, and much to learn from each other. The technologies we developed in isolation can be combined with your species' unique perspectives and abilities. Hanjae, who had been skeptical of the humans, from the beginning nodded his massive head. You could have simply defeated the swarm and claimed dominion over what remained. Instead, you seek partnership. We withdrew from the galaxy centuries ago because our predictive models showed no other path to victory, Hyun-soo explained. But isolation was never our goal. Humanity belongs among the stars, alongside others. Outside the broken windows of the council chamber, Construction crews from a dozen species worked to clear debris. In orbit, human dimensional technology was being integrated with Confederation engineering principles to create new types of vessels and habitats. Science teams pooled their knowledge, combining approaches that had developed independently for centuries. Yuna walked to the edge of the chamber where the wall had collapsed, looking out over the city. In the distance, she could see the first new buildings rising, structures that incorporated both human dimensional engineering and traditional Confederation aesthetics. "From the ashes," she said softly. Captain Junho joined her, watching as a transport ship bearing the combined insignia of humanity and the Confederation landed in a nearby plaza. "When we first detected your distress signal," he said, "many argued we should remain hidden longer, that our models showed better outcomes. With delayed intervention. Why didn't you?" His expression softened. "Because some things matter more than optimal probability. Some things are worth fighting for, even against impossible odds." In the sky above them, the stars were visible despite the daylight, a quirk of the dimensional technologies now protecting the planet. Among those stars, ships bearing the combined knowledge and determination of 18 civilizations spread outward, reclaiming worlds once thought lost forever. Where the galaxy had burned, light was returning, one world at a time. The end,